We're extremely fortunate and honored to have Congressman Marc Veasey with us. Congressman Veasey has served this is you were elected in 2012, so this is I'm doing the math. I went into journalism not to do math. So third term in the U.S. Congress representing District 33. He serves in the 115th Congress on the Armed Services and the Science, Space, and Technology committees. He's a Democrat from Fort Worth. He served 4 terms in the Texas legislature previously, representing District 95. He was a congressional staffer before that. He is a native of Fort Worth, born and raised, and a graduate of Texas Wesleyan University. I remember Congressman Veasey in the legislature. I remember a very different legislature when you served in the legislature. It seems like a very different time. Congressman Veasey is a hard worker by reputation. He was a hard worker in Austin, and he's a hard worker in Washington. There are show horses and workhorses in every Congress and in every legislature. I think everybody who worked with Congressman Veasey, both in his party and not in his party, would say that whatever they believed about what he did and what he said, that he was always working really hard on behalf of his constituents. And so it's always more fun to interview somebody who actually does work as opposed to simply likes to make headlines, because there are always those kind of folks. Anyway, give Congressman Veasey a big hand. Wonderful of him to join us today. I'm hoping that the conversation we have today is about substance, but I want to begin with process, which is to say I want people to understand what it is to be a member of Congress in a general sense. I mean, I think today obviously is a conversation we can have what it's like at the moment where everything is so nutty all the time. But just help us understand what your life is like as a member of Congress. I think we have this idea in our mind's eye what it must be like. Right. It's a lot more of a grind than we think. It's not glamorous. Can you talk about how you spend your time, what you do?
Yeah, no, absolutely, Evan. Being a member of Congress, first of all, it is definitely a real job. I mean, like lots of people commute for their work or for their careers, whatever it is they may happen to do. And usually every Monday, I go to DFW Airport and get on the plane. Luckily, we don't have first votes until about 6:30 p.m. And so I'm able to have breakfast with my son before he heads off to
How old is he?
He's 11.
11 years old.
Yeah, and he goes to Fort Worth Independent School District here. And I normally will have breakfast with him, and then I'm on the 10 o'clock flight. And then I'll come back on Thursday, and I'm usually back in time to have dinner on Thursday night. And then I just repeat that routine again. Now, sometimes the calendar will stagger and will come in on a Tuesday, and so I'll basically repeat that same routine Tuesday through Friday instead of Monday through Thursday. Now, my first 2 terms, in my first term, there was a Democratic Senate majority, and we had a Democratic president, Barack Obama, of course. And the Democrats lost control of the Senate after the 2014 election, and we had a Democratic president and Republican majorities in the House and in the Senate. And because of that, I was at home a lot. I think in 2016, I think that we were only in session a third of the year. And so I actually was back in the district here because I represent Fort Worth and Dallas. And I was back in the district a lot, and people would see me, and people would always ask me, "Why are you not in D.C.? Well, what's going on? Why are you not at work?" And I'm like, "Well, I'm here working because we're not in session." And the Republicans basically were like, "Well, we know Obama's going to veto everything, or we know that Harry Reid wasn't going to let bills through when Democrats controlled the Senate." And so they just basically said that we didn't need to be in session that much. Now that the Republicans control all 3 levers, they control the Senate, the House, and the executive branch. And so now we're actually there a lot. We're not really doing much, I'll be honest with you. The Republicans don't want to put a lot of bills on the House floor for us to vote on of substance. Their whole deal about government is a lot different than Democrats. They believe that the less government we have in our lives, the better off we are. And so actually trying to fix things and make them work, we're not there. It's a lot of basically window dressing. They want to make it look like we're in a lot and that we're there working because of the fact that they control all three levers. And there's a lot of work to be done, and we do our own individual work on committees and
Right.
and legislation and trying to pair up with a lot of things that, quite frankly, you never see, but because they're not really they're not interested in enough stories to get a clickbait on, and so you're never going to see them. But there's still a lot of work to be done behind the scenes.
This group of very smart students are trying to better understand the world that they're going to enter when they get out of school, and hopefully they'll enter some realm of public service where they're concerned about how government interacts with their lives and the lives of the people around them. And so I want to come back to this thing that you just said about how the Republicans in charge of Congress believe that less government is good. Why do we assume that they're wrong? Is there not an argument for government being out of the way of all of our lives, being out of the way of businesses, being out of the ways that people live their individual lives? Why is that assumed to be a bad thing?
Well, I don't think that is necessarily a bad thing. I think, like anything, when you take it to the extreme, that's where you get in trouble and things not happen. Like, for instance, we're here in Dallas-Fort Worth. This is one of the fastest growing areas in the entire country.
Right.
We have transportation needs that need to be met. You hear a lot of talk about infrastructure, but there's no one really putting forth any legislation right now on the Republican side that controls the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. They're not really putting anything forward for us to get ready to vote on to help with the woes that we're having here. Not only are we having infrastructure woes here, but all over the country, things need repair. Different segments of the population, D.C., Atlanta, all those places are growing very rapidly, just like Dallas-Fort Worth are. And so our infrastructure needs addressing. I mean, if we're going to really have a freeway system and an interstate system that can handle autonomous vehicles, then that's going to cost money. But the Republicans don't want to put anything forward to address those issues. And so that's taken less government to an extreme. But for you being able to operate your businesses, for those of you that are going to go into the small business world, we need to, obviously, the less we do to make it harder for you to do your job is a good thing.
If I were Governor Abbott sitting here or Lieutenant Governor Patrick sitting here, my view of what you just said would be, well, of course, what we want is for the federal government to get out of the way and let states take responsibility for, say, transportation. I mean, the question of, well, who's passing legislation or appropriating dollars to enable Dallas-Fort Worth to do what it needs to do, well, that really ought to fall down to the states. Now, the state would even say that really should fall down to the local level. What we've seen is a passing off of responsibilities, federal to state, state to local. Is your view that that's itself not necessarily a good thing? Because the state would argue that's the logical place for those decisions to be made, those appropriations to be made, is at the state level.
I think that there are a lot of decisions that the state makes that they can actually do better than the federal government. I think a perfect example of that is that I was out hunting recently. I love to hunt, and I love the outdoors.
You're a Democrat and you like to hunt?
Oh, I'm a Democrat and I like to hunt. And
I've seen everything.
Yeah, and if any of you would like to see my saved Snapchats of me out there at my last quail hunt, you're more than welcome to.
Okay.
I'll be happy to show them to you.
Right, we'll slide into your DMs so you can show us. Okay, go ahead.
But like parks and wildlife, usually on things like that, oftentimes the states really do a better job of regulating, the terrain when it comes to certain parts of governance than the federal government does. But when that money is misused, or when the money is used for political purposes, like we've seen here in the state of Texas,
right.
Under Abbott in certain circumstances, then no, the money needs to be actually earmarked. And education, I think, is a perfect example of that.
Right.
Where we have seen money that has been, not used as it was originally intended to, that was sent down from the federal government.
Right. Is the relationship between the federal government and the state of Texas, as you see it, different in the Obama administration and the Trump administration? I mean, of course, we know that there is a difference in that. During the Obama administration, there was a lot of tension between Texas and Washington, D.C. We made a point of pushing back against so much that had come from D.C., understandable. I thought, and I think a lot of people thought once Trump was elected, Republican administration, one more friendly ideologically to the people who run Texas, that everything would be great. But there still seems to be some tension. It's not completely gone, right?
Right. There's definitely still some tension. And I will also tell you that now that the Republicans are in control of the executive branch, the state of Texas, they don't necessarily come to see me for as many issues as they did before. Oftentimes they would come and ask for help because they were like, hey, we need somebody that can talk to the administration. We need sign off on this. So they don't come. I mean, that's part of being in the minority. Like they don't come and see us as often as they used to.
Right.
And so that's made a really big difference. But I would imagine, like for instance, on issues like transportation, to where we're a donor state,
Right.
and some of our money that we collect from the gas tax goes to other states, and they would like some help on issues like that, and they're probably not, it's probably not being receptive right now.
I think of two issues in particular where Republicans, when they woke up on November 9th of 2016 and discovered to their surprise, along with everybody else's, that Trump had won as opposed to Clinton, I have to imagine that the reaction of many people who run Texas was, well, at least on two issues, this is going to be better. We've been complaining about border security funding for years. We've been appropriating. Well, in the last budget, it was $800 million for border security over 2 years because the federal government was not doing its job. Well, maybe with the Republican administration, they'll take on responsibility for border security, and we'll be able to bring that appropriation down in the state budget to close to zero. And on health care, what we've been saying for 7 years, we don't like the Affordable Care Act. We want the federal government to do something about giving us our money back. Well, now we have a Republican administration. Surely that will happen. So we're more than a year into the Trump administration. We're still appropriating $800 million for every 2 years for border security, and the healthcare situation has not gotten resolved. So why do you think that is from your perspective? Because here in Texas, among Republicans, there was a lot of hope, Republicans in leadership, that a change in the administration would provide us with some relief. But that hasn't happened yet.
Well, the first thing that I would say is that this administration, they did not think that they were going to win. They made absolutely no preparation to be able to govern the country. I think that Donald Trump thought that he was going, and him and his kids were going to start a Facebook, a network, and that they were going to capitalize off of the fame, the additional fame that he received from running for president. You still have a lot of key vacancies that are in place within the executive branch, and so I think that is a big part of what you're seeing is just a lot of incompetence. The other thing that I will tell you is that it's not as easy as it looks, right? Like it's not like you can just say, okay, we need to be able to get this money, immediately and have it sent down. There are a lot of politics that take place. You have to have good people within the administration that can work on governance, especially when it comes to congressional relations, just to be able to make all of these things work right.
Yep.
And I don't really see that person within the White House right now. There, as you can tell on television, there are a lot of different issues that are going on in the White House. Most of the White House Chief of Staff, General John Kelly, most of his time is spent on controlling who comes in and out of Trump's office and what the message is coming out of Trump's office every day. So some of those things that you really rely on for a chief of staff to get done, like I did with Obama's chief of staff. Help me remember the Dennis
McDonough.
Yeah, McDonough.
Right.
You could often call McDonough and say, hey, I would like to get this done, or we need help. We're having some issues with getting federal judges appointed. You could call him, and you could get that sort of back.
But of course,
and forth.
McDonough came in late in the administration. Rahm Emanuel. People forget Rahm Emanuel was the first chief of staff. He's long gone from the administration by the time you're talking about probably calling McDonough. It just may be that with this administration, it's still early.
It is still early.
And then eventually, when they get everybody filled in to the positions you're talking about that have remained vacant, they have a little bit more of their sea legs under them, things will stabilize. And then the state will get out of the federal government what it wants.
I'm not sure that's going to happen. And the reason why I say that is that I'm not just saying that because I'm a Democrat. The reason why I'm saying that is because there are just so many things that are going on within that Trump White House. I mean, there are a lot of people that think that General Kelly is actually there because of his loyalty to the country, and that he doesn't even really like Donald Trump, and that they're having to deal with all of the theatrics and the people coming in and out of the White House. This Fire and Fury book. People will tell you that this Wolf guy that wrote the book, that he had just unencumbered access to the House, to the White House, that he was in and out talking with people throughout the administration, that they just basically let him in. This is a very non-experienced organization at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, and I don't know that that's going to change. I don't know if the president really is going to make the changes necessary from within his organization to make the White House a more responsive, a more well-organized place.
Let me turn this around and ask you about the Democrats in Congress then. So your position on the Republicans in charge of Congress and in the White House is clear. Has your party done a particularly good job of being in the minority? There seems to be enough dysfunction to go around in Washington right now. There's dysfunction among the Republicans, but there seems to be dysfunction among the Democrats too.
I think that we've done a good job. I mean, first of all, when you don't control, and you'll find this when you're going into media and journalism, when you don't control anything in Washington, D.C., it's hard to get people to pay attention to anything that you have to say. So if we have a press conference, there may be like 4 or 5 people that come to the control room to come and ask us questions, but there aren't a lot of people because they know that we're not in charge of any legislation that is coming onto the House floor.
You can't move the needle really by yourselves.
They know that and you guys know that we can't move the needle by ourselves. And because of that, it's really hard to get our message out. But I think that under the circumstances, that we've done a good job. And I think that there have been some criticisms of Democrats and our message. But I think that our Better Deal message is good. And what I'll also tell you too is this is something that I learned in high school basketball. The coach would always say, "Take what the defense gives you. Don't pull up and try to make a 3-pointer." If some guy's just going to let you just run up to the backboard and just shoot an easy 2 points and a layup if nobody's going to stop you. And what I will say is that Trump is the gift that keeps giving. And you can see this in some of these races, some of these state legislative races, what happened in Virginia to where, quite frankly, the Democratic Party there didn't even think that some of those seats that flipped were even competitive. And
they just basically found warm bodies for a lot of those races.
Exactly. They found warm bodies for a lot of those races. And because of the disorganization that I talked about earlier, and because the American public, in large part, doesn't like what they're seeing, I think that we're going to be largely successful based just on that.
Well, I want to come to 2018 a little bit, but I don't want to let the Democrats off the hook too easily as far as the degree to which you are or are not aligned on message. I mean, the shutdown vote is an interesting one. I looked at the delegation and the votes on whether or not to accept the deal that ultimately reopened the government after a couple of hours the other day. You were a no vote on the deal, but there were members of your party, including some who view themselves as quite progressive, including the Democrat who will arguably be at the top of the ticket in 2018 in Texas, Beto O'Rourke, your colleague from El Paso who's running for the U.S. Senate. He voted for the deal. So you had some who voted for it and some who voted against it. That would suggest to me that different people in the delegation had different views of that set of issues, right? So he decided that it was important enough to get disaster aid and important enough to fund the military. He said, whatever else may not be in this deal, I'm not happy about it, but I think that this is an important enough deal to vote yes. You voted no. Right. Can you talk about why?
Yeah, I voted no because I'm not certain that we're going to get a deal done on DACA just because I've seen how the immigration reform game has been played in D.C. on the Republican side, particularly in the House. And I don't think that we're going to get a deal unless it was tied to that. And so that was very important for me for the majority Latino district that I represent here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area.
And I know that there are more than 42,000 DACA kids in this area, are there not?
Yeah,
I mean, this is a very high percentage of the overall DACA population in Texas, which is itself second only to California's DACA population.
Right, that's right.
You represent a significant number of DACA kids.
No, that is absolutely
So this is a big issue for you as a member of Congress.
Yeah, it's a very big issue for me as a member of Congress.
Right.
But I know that those other things that were a part of the funding agreement were very important to the state of Texas. And because of that, the members that were Democrats that felt like they had to vote yes, particularly when it comes to the way that Houston was devastated.
You don't begrudge the Houston members voting yes in view of the Harvey aid.
Right.
That's significant.
Exactly.
I'm curious about what happened. I mean, again, I want to talk about 2018 through another door here, but I'm curious, again, from the standpoint of alignment, whether the Democrats are aligned behind Leader Pelosi. The former speaker, now the minority leader, who the other day spoke for some number of hours on the floor on this issue. Would you be comfortable with her being leader of your party if you all take back the House next time, or are you looking for new leadership? Time to overturn the mulch.
If we take back the House, if Democrats take back the House, which I think there's a great possibility that we will. I'm not saying that we're necessarily, 100% going to, but if we take back the House, Nancy will be the Speaker of the House.
Period, paragraph.
If we take back the House,
You're willing to make a pinky bet on that right now.
I'm willing to make a pinky bet on that right now. And I think that our leadership structure that we have right now will remain in place if we take back the House.
Now, you're a young guy with ambitions yourself, of course, because every young person in Congress looks in the mirror and sees a future U.S. senator or president staring back. You know how this goes. You still think that a woman of more than 70 years old who has been in Washington as long as she has would be the right public face for your party. You don't think it's time for the new generation to assert itself in terms of leadership in Congress?
I think that first of all, nobody knows the game better than Nancy does. She is a great negotiator. She knows how to count votes. I mean, she's just very good at her job, and I would say that she's just as good today as she was 20 years ago. She really, really does have that great of depth and knowledge. What I will also tell you is that the Democratic Party, the House, they're doing a great job of grooming the next generation of leaders as well through the Congressional Black Caucus, through the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, through Eric Swalwell and the Future Forum deal that he runs. I mean, you have a lot of different leadership venues in the House. Within the Democratic Caucus, that doesn't necessarily make the news or the headlines, but they're there. There are people that are being groomed, and I can tell you that I think that for 10, 20 years from now, that we're going to be in great shape.
But the votes are there now to continue with Leader Pelosi.
No doubt.
In the parliament.
There's no doubt.
Let me look back at the Texas legislature before we talk about 2018. So you were in the legislature, we said, for 4 terms. You were the chair of the caucus. Yes. You were the whip for the party at one point when you were there. Did you find the legislature to be an easy or hard place to get things done? You had been a staffer for a member of Congress. You ran for the Texas legislature. You're one of 150 House members. You were also a member of the legislature at a time when the party structure and control of the legislature was also pivoting. Right? Good time or bad time, good thing to have done or bad thing to do? And did you get what you wanted to get accomplished?
I will tell you that it is much more workable to get things done through the state legislature than the U.S. Congress. Because even if you are on the majority side, I mean, if you were to bring in one of the other local North Texas members of the delegation here that are Republican, because Eddie Bernice and I are the only 2 North Texas delegation members that are Democrats, right. They will tell you that being able to get legislation through the committee process and ultimately onto the House floor, which you have to go through Pete Sessions on the Rules Committee to get that stuff on the House floor, that it is very, very difficult. I always compare it to the legislative process in the U.S. House to really watching the grass grow, to where in the state legislature, everything happens really, really quickly, and I don't know what it's like there now. I know a lot has changed in Austin since 2012, but when I was there, I mean, I got 4 pieces of legislation passed my last session as a member of the minority, and we were like deep in the minority when I was in the Texas House, but I was able to get 4 bills passed. One was a very major bill that helped write the expungement code. So, in
fact, your last term was 2011.
Right, that's right.
And so that was the session after the 2010 election when the Democrats got completely blown out. There was a Republican wave. That was the year of the Tea Party, and you were down to below 50. I believe you had fewer than 50 Democrats in the House that session, and yet you still got stuff done.
Yeah, we were still able to get things done, and it was really amazing too. I mean, going from 76, 74 in 2008, we had 76. 2009 session, we had 76 Republicans, 74 Democrats. Yeah. And then after that, really, bad, as President Obama called it, a shellacking that we took in 2010. Yeah. 2011 was different. People treated you a lot different.
I think it was 101-49 after the party switches.
That's right.
Is that right?
They were able to pass a constitutional amendment without a single Democrat. And because of that, it really made things difficult. But yet, I was still able to get 4 bills passed. It's much, much harder in the U.S. House to do that.
I'm interested in how you talk about the pace of work in the Texas legislature versus Congress. One of the things about the Texas legislature that is different, not just from Congress, but from a lot of other state legislatures, is that the Texas legislature is only in session 5 months every 2 years, 140 days every 2 years. But even that, which sounds like not very much time, this is the 10th or 11th largest economy in the world if Texas were a nation, and yet the entire business of this state is done for all practical purposes over 140 days every 2 years, except for the fact that for the first 60 days of that 140 days, you guys can't actually pass legislation. Right. You're honoring the Little League from Big Spring, right? Or you have people, I mean, really, it's only 80 days that you get things done. So you're doing the business of a state this large in 80 days every 2 years. Right. Is that a good thing? That sounds terrible to me. No, I couldn't run my business only for 80 days.
That's right. That's right. No, the lobbyists love it. Because the lobbyist view is very similar to the Republicans' view of government, which is the less hands that are stirring the pot, the less things that are going on and happening, then the industries that we represent are better off. And I don't need to come in and lobby you or worry about a bill that's going to tax us or put some sort of regulatory requirement on us that's going to be onerous and expensive. So lobbyists love it, but for the state, again, with a state that's suffering with transportation needs, with a state that, a lot of our suburban school districts, the people that live out there will tell you that those districts are fine, but we have aging schools and ones that aren't performing well here. They're not funded fairly. There are always lawsuits going on about that. I mean, there are just so many different things going on and that are very important to each and every one of our lives that really do need probably a long-term approach, and it's hard to do that when you only meet every other year. So
you represented Tarrant County in the legislature.
Yes.
And you talk about how in Congress there are really only a couple of Democrats representing this part of the state, you and Congresswoman Eddie Bernice Johnson, who is herself. There are 12 of you, I counted. There were 12 of you of the 36 in Congress who did serve in the Texas legislature previously. So a third of you have the experience of having done both. When you were representing Tarrant County in the legislature, there were more Democrats than there are representing Congress, representing this area in Congress, right?
A lot more.
But what's interesting about the Tarrant County delegation then and especially now is that it's the left and the right. Mm-hmm. You have some of the most liberal members of the delegation in Congress, in the legislature from Fort Worth, and then you have some of the most conservative. This is a pretty interesting part of the state, is it not?
No, it is.
Politically. And in some ways, it really reflects the way that the center has disappeared from politics.
Right.
You think that's okay? I tried to tell Mayor Rawlings last night that the center disappearing from politics was a thing and was terrible, and he pretty much sort of smacked me away. He didn't want to talk about that. You agree that the center is gone?
I think that the center is just about completely gone, and I think that it's actually bad for politics. I think that having districts, I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with neighborhoods here in the Dallas area, but Highland Park, which is a very rich, affluent district where SMU is located, and then you have South Dallas, which probably has some of the highest levels of poverty throughout the city. I will tell you that a member of Congress or a member of the legislature or even school board or city council for that matter that has to worry about someone voting for them that lives in a neighborhood like Highland Park and someone that has to worry about them voting for them that lives in a neighborhood like South Dallas, they're probably going to be a better member of whatever body it is they happen to represent by having to get and worry about what people from different or in diverse areas of their city or region think, and having a district having only one competitive congressional district since 2012. In this state is not good. We think that a lot of those districts are going to be competitive for this upcoming cycle, but really 2012, 14, and 16, there was only one congressional district in the entire state out of 36 districts that were even challenged, that people even thought were even feasible for them to flip from one party to the other.
And do you blame gerrymandering, Congressman? I mean,
There's
I know
no doubt.
it's fashionable to say, well, redistricting is the cancer on our democracy, right? That's the thing that's killing us because it makes our elections not competitive. That's why voter turnout in Texas is so bad. People have checked out because they believe that the system is rigged and that redistricting is doing the rigging.
Right.
That's where you are.
I think that redistricting is doing the rigging, and I will also tell you this, is that I think that bad redistricting also it plays a factor in the whether or not statewide elections are competitive in all 50 states. Because if everyone knows that the game is rigged on congressional seats and they never really see any change, then people will just start voting by default for party for statewide races. And so I actually think that it has a negative effect. Some people say, well, look at how partisan that the Senate has become, and that and on both sides, Democrat and Republican. But I will tell you that, in my opinion, we would have a much different U.S. Senate than we have right now if we had better redistricting. I just think that everything has become so polarized, and that it people probably just don't want to participate.
Let me push back against that. And in some, I mean, I agree with you that redistricting is a problem, but I also think that at the moment, the Democrat, I'm going to just say this, you may not like it, that the Democratic Party in Texas is at the height of lameness in terms of its ability to recruit candidates to run for statewide office. It's been 24 years since a Democrat was elected statewide in Texas. Redistricting is not keeping the party from recruiting better candidates. You have arguably the worst statewide Democratic ticket top to bottom this year, not congressional, but the worst statewide Democratic ticket, top to bottom, governor, lieutenant governor, all the statewide offices that I can remember in years. Why is that? What's happened? I mean, the lack of competitiveness in elections is at least in part rooted in the fact that the Democrats have had a pretty bad time recruiting good candidates.
I mean, when you haven't won an election in 24 years, obviously that is going to play a role into being able to recruit. I think that we're going to have some great candidates that are going to be running statewide on the ballot in 2018, but obviously there are going to be challenges for any state party, whether it's Democrat or Republican, if you haven't won elections. I'm sure that Republicans in California probably have a hard time finding good quality Republicans to run in that state because of what you just pointed out.
But in the reverse case, right? So Republicans are where in California where Democrats are in Texas.
Right, exactly. But I will tell you, back to the congressional races a little bit.
Yeah.
When I was a staffer, I worked for Martin Frost. He was a local congressman here. He represented Dallas and Fort Worth.
And a pretty powerful member, not just in terms of the state, but nationally.
Right, yeah. Absolutely. Had chair of the DCCC, had been the Democratic caucus chair. And when Tom DeLay decided that he was going to get rid of all of those members of Congress, one of the reasons why he wanted to get rid of all the white Democrats, because you had Democrats like Max Sandlin, Charlie Stenholm, that were representing areas that didn't necessarily even have that large of a minority population, but they were able to get white voters to split their tickets. They were able to get these white voters to split their tickets and vote for Democrats, and Republican consultants and strategists knew that as long as these white Democrats were still in office, that being able to just get white people to just think, hey, I just need to vote for the Republican Party. They represent they represent mostly, whites, and they just want people they wanted people to just think that the Republican Party was their party by default. And I think that when he succeeded in getting rid of those Democrats, and people splitting their tickets became even less and less in the state. Yep. Because you had West Texas, East Texas, and then here in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, you have people that would split their tickets for Martin, and then all of a sudden you have these members of Congress that are doing a good job, and now you don't have anybody to split your ticket for anymore. So What happens? Majority of white voters just go in, pull straight Republican ticket, and then they see that a lot of the state reps and members of Congress that are being elected on the Democratic side don't necessarily look like them. And so Tom DeLay really split us racially and politically the way he wanted to for gain.
So just to come back to your optimism about the 2018 ticket, you think there's any statewide race that the Democrats have a chance of winning?
I think that Beto is probably one of the most outstanding.
Of course, I think that's a federal race, but it's a statewide race in the sense that he'll be on the ticket. Or any of the non-U.S. Senate, or any of the other races, ones that you think the Democrats have a chance of winning?
I think that when you see what's going on in the country right now, you look around the country, you see what's going on. You have Democrats that are winning in races and elections like we haven't really seen before.
Right.
I think the Wisconsin state Senate seat.
Right.
Again, we talked about Virginia.
Trump won by more than 20 points,
right,
and Democrats
exactly.
just won. There was a Missouri legislative seat that just flipped the other day. Trump had won that legislative district by 30 points. The Democrats came back and won. There have definitely been some moments around the country where you've seen that. We just looked at the Secretary of State's numbers on voter registration in Texas. Voter registration in Texas is right now 15.2 million heading into the primaries and counting, which is a full 10% higher than what it was in 2014. So we know that voter registration is at least significantly higher than the last set of statewide elections. Do you know that those are necessarily going to be Democratic voters? Maybe they're people on the Trump train.
I think that most of them are going to be Democratic voters, but let me just share this with you. If we didn't register a single person to vote, and I say we, I mean the Democratic Party, elected officials and volunteers, et cetera, if we didn't sign up a single person to vote for the 2018 election, if we could just get the Democrats that came out to vote for Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama in the 2008 primary, if we could get that same group to come out and vote, we could win every statewide seat without registering a single voter.
Well, and if I were 6'8", I'd be playing for the Knicks, and Porzingis' ACL would not be as much of a problem for them. But the reality is, I'm not 6'8", and you guys not turning out to presidential level turnout is a constant. I mean, you don't turn out presidential level turnout in the midterms. I guess that's really the question: is how do you motivate the people who turn out in presidential elections to turn out in the midterms?
I think that the president of the United States that's in office right now is going to be a big part of that. I mean, who would have thought that Doug Jones, this very, very low key, white Democrat from Alabama, that he was going to get as high a percentage of African Americans to turn out and vote.
Yeah, but he's running.
Barack Obama did.
He's running against Roy Moore. I mean, we've gone from it takes a village to it takes a child molester. I mean, come on. Roy Moore is not a constant in all these elections.
I agree that Roy Moore is not a constant in all these elections. But if you go and you look at the exit polling data that came out of that Alabama race, the two factors that got black voters to come out and vote, it was Roy Moore and Donald Trump. And so Donald Trump is still going to be president.
So there's a Trump effect. All right, so let's talk about that.
Trump effect.
All right, so right now the delegation is 25 Republicans, 11 Democrats, a congressional delegation. It is maler and whiter and more Republican, the delegation, than the state, right? The state is roughly divided by gender 50-50, but there are only 3 women currently in the delegation. The state is 43% Anglo, 39% Hispanic, some percentage African American. The delegation is much whiter than the population in the main. The state is roughly 40% Democrat, 60% Republican based on the last several elections. It's basically a 20-point difference. The delegation is more than two-thirds Republican. So we know that the delegation, because of gerrymandering, may not reflect the actual state. But in this set of elections, the most interesting thing, I think, is that for the first time that I can ever remember, maybe ever, the Democrats have fielded general election candidates in all 36 races, right? There is a Democratic candidate running for every one of these seats. You think that's Trump. You think that the motivation this time for Democrats to actually file is a protest vote against the president.
Absolutely. I have never seen, again, this is my 20th year working in politics, whether it be an elected official or, again, a staffer for a U.S. member of Congress. I've never seen this type of excitement in a midterm like ever before. Even in 2002, when we had Ron Kirk, who's from here, who's a very
former Dallas mayor,
a very charismatic, just gregarious guy,
right, and was running against John Cornyn. First time when Cornyn ran for the Senate.
Yeah, that's right. And that was an exciting year for Democrats, just because we had this dream team ticket. But this time around, even more excitement. We have more people, like you said, that are running for office. Even in state rep seats in places like Collin County,
right.
You have people that are running for state rep. And you have challenges within the Democratic primary just to be the nominee. And
well,
so
here again, I brought the receipts. So in 2014, there were 56 Republican-held House seats with no Democratic opponent, and this time there were only 16 Republican-held House seats with no Democratic opponent. Right. You all have turned out a lot more candidates, whether or not you ultimately win those races. So you mentioned that the one competitive district in previous congressional elections, it was District 23.
That's right.
That's the one now held by Republican Will Hurd. That's the San Antonio district that extends out to West Texas. This time, there are 3 districts that the Republican incumbent won last time, but that Hillary Clinton won. Sessions in Dallas, Hurd in San Antonio out to West Texas, and Culberson in Houston. But there are actually a bunch of other races that you all are contesting pretty aggressively.
Right.
So you think you have a chance this time. And, it is the first midterm election in a new president's first term, and typically the party in power in the White House in that first midterm loses seats.
Right.
In the Obama first midterm, the Democrats lost more than 60 seats in the U.S. House. In the first Clinton midterm, the Democrats lost more than 50 seats in the U.S. House. You only need 24 seats to take back control of Congress.
That's right.
So you're optimistic that not just in Texas but around the country, that's what's going to happen. Is there one race not among the obvious ones in the congressional map in Texas that you as a veteran observer of this think that we should be watching? One that we're not thinking about now, other than the 3 I mentioned?
From what I've seen, it's really the 3 that you mentioned that are really going to be
best opportunity.
Yeah, the very best opportunities. And I think that, again, we have candidates running in all of those seats. that are going to do a great job once they get to the general election. I think they match up with districts very well, which which is something that hadn't always happened in previous elections. Sometimes you'll have someone running in a very competitive, not a competitive seat, but a seat that is very R-leaning or just R-leaning, and they're not necessarily the best candidate for that seat, just because their politics may be a little too far left. But you have like great candidates, like I mentioned those Democrats that Tom DeLay wanted to get rid of.
Right.
Jim Turner, his son is running in one of those state house seats.
Right.
That Hillary Clinton carried, but.
His name is John Turner.
John Turner.
He's a Haynes and Boone law firm attorney. He's running as a Democrat in District 116, which is the Jason Villalba House District.
That's right.
In Dallas, Villalba is perceived as a slightly more moderate than conservative Republican, although he would argue with that probably. But he has a challenger himself in the primary to his right.
Right.
And if he survives, he'll be facing this strong Democrat well-known in that
right.
Dallas district.
And his dad represented, I think it was Charlie Turner's old district.
Right.
And it was a Republican area in East Texas.
Right. And in fact, John Turner's sister runs the Annette Strauss Institute, a partner of ours and of the Sumner's Foundation's actually right here, Susan Nold. So this is it's all in the family.
Yeah, absolutely. But we have good candidates like that are running that actually fit the district, which is very important.
We're going to go to questions now from all of you. We could talk. I would love to have about 4 more hours with the congressman, but I'm going to let you all come on into the conversation. We have a microphone that we're going to walk around, and why don't you say who you are and where you go to school, and the congressman will be happy to answer your question.
All right. My name is Tyler Olin, and I'm from Howard Payne University. I'm a pre-law student. Yeah. My question to you is, most of your comments today have been talking about, at least some of your comments have been about partisanship, about how the middle is vanishing. Yet each of your comments today have either been pro-Democrat or anti-Republican. So are you a part of the problem? If not, then how do you aim to solve that problem?
Well, first of all, let me say this. My district voted 70% for Hillary Clinton. And with having a district that voted 70% for Hillary Clinton, I will tell you that we need more districts like the one in 23. We need more districts like that because right now the parties don't really, and you see this particularly on the Republican side. The Republicans, Kevin McCarthy, I forgot what the quote was he gave the other day, but they're not doing anything.
This is the Republican majority leader of the U.S. House.
Yeah, so he's right up under the Speaker of the House, right under Paul Ryan. They're not doing anything to try to protect their moderates. If they were really trying to protect their moderates, they would have a immigration reform bill on the House floor for us to vote on because we could actually pass it. If there were more moderate Republicans within their conference, they would feel like they needed to have a more moderate view of things and not let the Tea Party and the extremists run it because they would actually there would actually be some value in that.
But couldn't they say on the flip side of it that if there were more moderate Democrats in the House that you all would have already passed some kind of immigration reform? I mean, couldn't they say the same thing about you guys?
Well, if there were more moderate Democrats in the House and we were in the majority, we would pass a comprehensive immigration reform bill.
You represent, so you said your district went 70% for Hillary Clinton. So
Yes.
presumably 30% at least of your district is Republican enough to have voted for Donald Trump.
Right.
You represent those 30%.
Yeah, I feel that I represent those 30%. If you look at my voting record, you'll see that I have switched over and that I have voted for bills that.
Give us an example of an issue on which you represented your district rather than your party, in that respect.
I was one of the Democrats. Maybe there were two of us, maybe 3 of us that voted for Keystone Pipeline, and there were a lot of people that were like, I'm upset about that. And I was like, we do represent the largest oil and gas producing state in the country. We need for voters out there, particularly voters that may be sitting on the fence, that may be thinking about voting for some of these candidates that are running in 2018. They need to see that there are other Democrats out there that are in office currently that their views are aligned with the Texas state economy.
Good. You had an answer. I like that. Great. Ma'am.
Hi, thank you very much for being here, Congressman.
Say who you are, where you go to school.
Pardon,
it's okay.
I never remember this. My name is Megan Arago. I go to the University of Dallas. When Mr. Smith brought up the idea of state government and the Republican concern or the conservative concern with maintaining state rights, or what we might consider federalism. Your response was that we do think that states do important work, but the principle was one of expediency or utility. Most of us here are Sumner scholars who are seeking to learn and promote the principle of self-governance. So I'm wondering if there's anything fitting about the way in which we divide the political power between the federal government and the state governments, or is it all just states can do the things that are easy enough for them to do based upon the principle of expediency?
I think I kind of got your question. You're
Wondering if there's anything particularly fitting about where our governments operate.
You understand the tension between the states and the federal government in the same way that there's now in Texas, especially tension between the states and the cities.
Right.
Everybody wants to do the thing that they want to do, and there's always a big fight on as to who gets to make the call on that.
right.
What do you think about that balance?
I think that the current balance that we have is good, but again, I think that where there have been abuses, particularly like with Department of Education and the issue that we had when Michael Williams was chair down there, then the federal government does need to come in and maybe tighten up some of the rules. But I think for the most part, in my opinion, I think that the system works well. As seeing from someone that was in the state legislature and is now in Congress, I would tell you that for the most part, I think that it works very well. I think that on some of the more major issues where there are some financial challenges that need to be overcome, like with federal funding for our highway system, for instance, then we probably, if for Texas's sake, it probably would be good if they would give us a little bit more leeway to spend our money how we would like to, but that would come at the detriment, obviously, of states that, for instance, aren't donor states.
I guess I wonder if this ties back to the first question. You know, if you're in Texas and the Democrats are in charge of Washington, you hate Washington. Then the Republicans take control of Washington, suddenly we're good. If you're a Democrat and Democrats in the White House, you think, please, Washington, come be involved with us. But then the Republicans take over and you think, is there a version of this where you rail against the thing that you were 4 or 5 minutes ago, depending upon the party that you're in?
Right.
And there's plenty of that to go around, right?
Right. I would say that the tension, regardless of what party that you're going to be in, is always going to be there, because some of these rules from the federal government that govern like how these states use any federal funding, some of them haven't been changed in a long time, and there have been instances where there have been Republicans that have tried to work with the federal government to get some of those rules loosened up, and the same thing on the Democratic side. Like I can tell you that when 2009, we used the money that the federal government sent from the bailout money. We used that to balance the state's budget. And, you know, I really did think that it would have been better had that money actually gone to mayors and localities for them to be able to suspend it to actually put people to work. Because at that time, the economy wasn't doing as well as it would have. Instead of us using it to balance our budget, that if we could have used that money to actually build infrastructure, to work on quote-unquote shovel-ready projects. That was one of the terms that was used back in 2009.
Right.
I think that it would have been better. So there's always going to be disagreements, even when it's from within your own party. But I do think that that people generally tend to not notice those issues as much when it's your own party that is controlling the White House.
Got it. Hands up. We'll have more. Bring the microphone around to you.
Good afternoon. My name is Wes Joseph from Shriner University, and my question for you is, how do you define fairness, which is generally a subjective term, in regards to determining district boundaries?
Yeah, what is fair? So if you could wave your wand over redistricting and make them fairer, what does that look like?
The first thing that I would do is say that you can't, the districts obviously need to be as compact as possible, and you can't split communities of interest, which is something that the Republicans have been very masterful at doing, and by doing so, they've discriminated against communities of interest. So, like for instance, I'm not sure how many of you, or again, live around here or work around here, but along Interstate 20, and Joe Barden represents most of this constituency. In North and South Arlington, Mansfield area, there's been a huge number of African Americans that have moved into that area. In order to make one of the state Senate seats and some of the state House seats more competitive, the Republicans have come in and they've split those communities up. And so, Brian Birdwell, for instance, who's one of our state senators, he represents a district that stretches all the way out into Granbury, which is in Hood County, and there's a little bitty finger that comes up to take out a portion of that African American community in the Arlington Mansfield area to make that district like less competitive, or not to make that district less competitive, but to make the other state Senate districts in the area less competitive for the Republican state senators. And so it's just issues like that, like the community that I was raised in West Fort Worth. It's not in Connie Burton's district. It's in Jane
Nelson.
Jane Nelson's district.
Right.
And they cut that community out on purpose to make it not competitive. So now the people in Como have a state senator that's all the way up in Denton County.
Can
that
I ask
makes
you, though,
absolutely no sense at all.
The way that redistricting is done, for the benefit of people in the room who don't know, is that the people who run the state ultimately decide the maps that determine the elections for the next 10 years. When Democrats ran the state, Democrats controlled the maps. Republicans control the state, Republicans control the maps. When Democrats control the state, they drew the maps to benefit Democrats remaining in power. Republicans run the state, they draw the maps to benefit Republicans remaining in power. Again, if this is not necessarily about the Republicans, it's about people in power wanting to remain in power, right? So can you construct a system in which it doesn't make a difference who's in power, but the maps are drawn fairly without regard to party?
Yeah, absolutely. And let me just say this on the record. I don't think that elected officials in any of the 50 states should be drawing maps. I served on the redistricting committee my last session in the Texas legislature, and it was almost, some of the things that happened behind the scenes are really ridiculous. People wanting certain churches and schools, and people wanting, I remember getting into an argument with one of my colleagues when I was in the state legislature within the Tarrant County delegation because they didn't want to split the campus of UTA up. So it's just like different things like that
Right.
really shouldn't matter, but people worry about when it comes to redistricting. I think that what we ought to have is a state panel, and similar to what the one that California has, and the state panel redraws these lines. You have to fill out an application. You have to show that you weren't a overly partisan person, like you haven't given donations to political candidates, different things like that. And you have an equal number of Democrats and Republicans that sit down. They can get guidance from something like the Ledge Council, which is the state
Research
legal
arm.
arm within the state legislature that as a legislator I actually relied on when I was in Austin to help make sure that my bills were constitutional. So you can have the Ledge Council, for instance, help guide the citizens panel to redraw these maps, and you would have much more square and dense maps than you do now. And I will tell you that when the Democrats controlled the House, because I was in the again, I was a staffer, and we actually had a majority Democratic controlled state congressional delegation, I think by 2 seats when I was a staffer. And of course, that drove time delay crazy. But I can tell you, if you go back and you look at the way how the maps were drawn then versus now, the Democratic maps, I'm sure that they were drawn for Democratic gain, but they were much more aligned for incumbency. The Republicans that had congressional seats, the incumbency was very much more taken into consideration than partisanship. If you go back and you look at those maps to when the Democrats were
So
in
if
control.
Democrats were in charge now and had the power to draw the maps to keep Democrats in charge, you would still be advocating for this committee of 12 eunuch robots to run redistricting?
Yes, I would definitely. I just don't think that elected officials should be in the business of redrawing maps.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, based on my experience on this redistricting committee, it was, I could just tell you story after story after story, and a lot of it just doesn't have anything to do with representing people. And unfortunately, again, a lot of these communities, particularly communities of color, have just been marginalized by just little strange fingers coming in. Let's just get enough Hispanics. Let's just get enough blacks just to make the state senate or congressional seat or state house seat not competitive. And that's not good.
Sir.
Hey, Greg from Southern Methodist University. So I was curious, having sat on the Science, Space, and Technology Committee of the House, what are your thoughts on Elon Musk launching the Falcon Heavy last week? And just more generally, how is the relationship between government and tech changing with all these moonshot projects?
Yeah, no, absolutely. That is a really good question. That launch was obviously, very important. And we really work very closely with the private sector and these entities on this committee that I'm on, Science, Space, and Technology, to try and give them the help that they need from a federal standpoint so they can be successful. We know that there are some things that they're able to do, and that we should allow them to do that. At the same time, we need to continue to fund NASA, and we need to continue to make sure that we have the strongest space program run out of NASA. But the relationship that we have with SpaceX and some of these other entities that are working on these space projects, I think are very, very strong. I think that people would be would like, if they could just, would be very happy to see the symmetry with that relationship. Now, I don't think that the Republicans on the committee, again, here comes the partisan side out, I don't think the Republicans on the committee are committed to NASA's mission as much as they need to be.
Should we be reinvesting in the public side of space exploration? Because really what's happening is we're seeing, and it's a bit of a both and, public and private, but there is this question of whether the responsibility for space exploration should still be on the public side of things, or whether it's Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk, whether we should be turfing this over to the private sector. What's your view of that?
No, we should not be turfing it all over to the private sector, because I can tell you that the control for space, like who controls space, is going to be just as key as us fighting Al-Qaeda and ISIS as years continue to go on. And so we have to make sure that we have a strong space program, and that the federal dollars are there to make sure that we're as competitive as we need to be above the earth.
Okay. Any more? Mrs. Drummond in the back.
Excuse me.
We got about 3 minutes.
Thank you, Congressman Ann Drum. I'm not a student, but I'm a lifelong learner. Would you please talk about the real-life impact of fundraising pressure? How many hours a week you have to spend dialing for dollars, what that does to functionality in Congress, and what we should do about it.
And understanding that you're not in a competitive district, so you're fundraising essentially in a non-race.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. No, it is. I have to spend at least 2 to 3 hours a day on the phone raising money on Monday through Friday. People don't really generally like to be called on Saturdays and Sundays. And so that means while I'm in D.C., I have to pick up the phone and I have to raise. And there's too much money in politics. I wish we had a way to publicly finance these congressional races and these Senate races, keep self-funders out, keep the PAC dollars and the individual donations out. But I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. And so, yeah, there's a lot of pressure, not only to raise money for yourself to get reelected, but also for you to raise money to give to the parties, the DCCC, the NRCC, DSCC, and the Senate component for the Republican side, to help people get elected in races where there are competitive districts. One of the big issues, and Evan just pointed this out a second ago, is that with more and more of these congressional districts in particular being drawn to favor one party or the other, oftentimes Washington's view is that, look, there's going to be a Republican or a Democrat in this seat whether you win or not. And so, hey, kid, you're kind of on your own. And that even ramps up the pressure more, because more than likely, if someone loses, it's going to be in a primary, and you have to go out there and you basically have to be on your own and raise money. And again, with me being a Democrat in a district where Hillary Clinton won at 70%, it makes it even tough. And as a Congressional Black Caucus member, people just automatically look at me and say, hey, you're a Congressional Black Caucus member, you have a safe district, we don't need to give you any money. And so I'm always having to raise and spend time on the phone and do this routine, and it's not easy. It is not easy. Some people will. It's funny. I've had people tell me, don't call me, just text me when you need money. I know people's routines. There's just some people I know. Like if I wanted to actually get a check, I don't need to call this person. I just need to text them or send them an email. There are some people I know they don't want to give in the general. They only want to give in the primary or vice versa. And then some people will say, hey, I see you're calling. I know what you want. I know every time this time of the year when you call, I know you need something. And so, that can be a little bit awkward when that happens.
People block your calls?
No one's blocked my calls yet, but it is funny when you're at an event and someone will say, hey, I saw you call 3 times last week. I'm going to get you something in the mail.
Right. Well, and we need to wrap up, but I mean, I kind of imagine that you get into this habit of raising money all the time that you no longer see people as people. I'm remembering that old Bugs Bunny cartoon when he's crawling in the desert, starving to death and almost dehydrated, and sees a fat guy and a skinny guy as a hamburger and a hot dog. I imagine that running for Congress must be like walking into a room and all you see are hamburgers and hot dogs.
Yeah. No, you know what? Let me tell you this: is that as someone that's more on the introverted scale, I actually enjoy being able to have conversations with people, because that may be the only time I get to talk with them is when I do get them on the phone in a fundraising type scenario. And so I actually feel like that when I can engage people one-on-one,
Yep.
that I kind of get to know them a little bit better, and that I have a more meaningful relationship with people in one-on-one relationships. And so, I don't see them like that at all. I actually enjoy being able to catch up. And hey, one of my very best supporters was sick recently, and I called him up. Didn't ask him for any money, but called him up and was asking him, asking him how he felt. Especially after going through something like prostate cancer. Like how did you feel, and how's everything going? And we just kind of chit chatted. And so, you kind of get to know people when you call them over and over again. You get to know things that are going on in their lives, and how their kids are doing, what colleges that they're going to, different things like that. And so, I would say that we probably don't have enough time to get to have meaningful one-on-one relationships as members of Congress. And so that's the one thing that the fundraising actually does, is that it allows you to
opens
catch
that
up.
door. I like how
it
you
does.
turn the negative into a positive there. That was pretty good. All right, we got to stop right here. Please give Congressman Veasey a big
Thank
hand.
you.
Thank him for being
Great
here.
questions.
Very good. Thank you.